All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. I want to again thank Rabbi Silber for the beautiful, beautiful breakfast. And let us begin. I'm sorry we're getting started a few moments late, but we have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. I will say we'll begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the Shirman Drushos this month in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen. And to thank Noam Leah Efron for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi. Not good? Better? Yeah? Okay. All right, well, so with that, let us begin. We thank our sponsors for their ongoing generosity, and once again, thank Rabbi Silber for the beautiful breakfast. So we'll say today's daf is Tes Vav 15, and we are picking up Emeretz Hashem, actually top of Tes Vav. We left off kind of a little bit in the middle of the sugya. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, yesterday was all about the din of esrog, right? How do we understand an esrog? Is an esrog, the fundamental machlokes was, is an esrog treated like a yerek, in which case its meiser status is designated by shas likitaso when it is picked, or is an esrog have the din of peros, of an elon, and therefore again, halacha lamaisa, its meiser status is solidified as when chanata, when there is blossoming. That was the fundamental machlokes. Now, interestingly enough, the conclusion the Gemara kind of left off with is that esrog much more resembles a vegetable, and therefore halacha lemaisa, the isuro is b'shas likitaso. The meiser status is determined by when it is picked. The issue the Gemara then brought up was as follows: if halacha lemaisa esrog is like a yarek, like a vegetable, then when should its Rosh Hashana be? When should Rosh Hashana be? Tishrei, just like vegetables. To which the Gemara says, we're picking up Tes Vav Amud Aleph, second line down. Elei itmar hachi itmar. The Gemara is the kasha. Amar barafuna afal gav the Amar begamliel esrog achar likita kiyarek but Rosh Hashana shlosh Shavat. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Even though halacha lemaisa, we established that an esrog has the meiser status of a vegetable, and that meiser designation is established by when the esrog is picked. Nevertheless, it will have the Rosh Hashana li'ilanos. So I will say, interestingly enough, what comes out is that esrog itself is a hybrid. It's a hybrid. It has qualities of a vegetable and it has qualities of a tree. It has quality, I'm talking about in a halachic sense. It has qualities of a vegetable in that its meiser status will be determined by when it is picked, but it has the identity of a tree in that halacha lemaisa, its Rosh Hashana will be Shvat. And as we established yesterday, Rabbi Akiva's doubt was not about whether or not the halacha follows Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's clear. The halacha follows who? Beis Hillel, and therefore the Rosh Hashana for the esrog will be Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat. Absolutely incredible. So we'll say, let's go back. We're not finished with esrog because we still have to go through the sugya, and then we're going to see the Rambam. Because I will say, it could very well be that in this sugya, esrog is going to turn out to be one of the most complex things. Quite fascinating. So Ma'ishna Hasam Diktanim Haisa Shnia Nichnesas L'Shlishis. So we'll say the Gemara just asks a different question. See, we've been illustrating this idea of when the new year for a particular item is based on the fact that you could have a fruit or a vegetable, for that matter, that matures in 1 year but is harvested in the second year. So, for example, by vegetables, the Gemara illustrated the example of a vegetable by saying Im Haisa Shnia Nichneses L'Shlishis. So by vegetables, the Gemara often illustrated the example by talking about a vegetable which matured in year 2 but was harvested in year 3. Yet over here by esrog, umayshna hacha diktani im haisa shlishis nichneses l'revius. Interestingly enough, by esrog, the Gemara illustrates the example of blossoming in 1 year, harvesting in another year, as an esrog that blossoms in year 3 and is harvested in year 4. So the Gemara just asks, why is this not symmetrical? I was about to say, again, not exactly a bam kasha, but nevertheless fascinating, which is this idea that halacha lemaisa, if you want to illustrate blossoming in 1 year, harvesting in a second year, so why not use the same year? So by vegetables, you're using blossoming year 2, harvesting year 3. By esrog, you're using blossoming year 3, harvesting year 4. Why? Rabbi say this is quite fascinating. Milsav agav orchei kamash malan. So the Gemara says, because the Gemara is actually teaching us just stama halacha. The esrog kashile yada va'aidid memash meshevei kuli ama b'shvius lo ta'un pri ad tlas shnin. So we'll say the Gemara gives a very interesting idea that what happens. Halacha, something wrong? Too close, sorry. Okay. Yeah, okay. Better? All right. It's like a Zemer or something. Okay. So listen to this. So the Gemara explains that halacha lamaisa, we're learning something different, which is, this is fascinating, and this is very lamaisa. An esrog tree, after the Shemitah year, doesn't bear fruit for another 3 years. Why not, the Gemara says? Because since on Shemitah, better? Yeah? Since on Shemitah, everybody's touching the tree. So I'll move back a little bit. Since on Shemitah, everyone's touching the tree. Therefore, halacha lamaisa, that takes its toll on the tree, and therefore it doesn't bear fruit or viable fruit for another 3 years. That's why by the esrog, the case that's given is year 3 into year 4. Masha'enkein, ultimately by vegetables, it was giving year 2 into year 3. We'll say such an incredible yisod, because the esrog tree is handled so much because it's hefker during Shemitah, it doesn't go ahead and bear fruit. It doesn't bear fruits ultimately for another 3 years. We'll say, I was thinking about this. It's really an incredible metaphor, which is that sometimes in life, if you want things to grow, you have to leave them alone. In other words, if you're constantly shepherding it, and you're constantly touching it, and you're constantly involved in it, and I think this is a good yesod in parenting as well, that every parent knows there's this incredible fine line. You have to be involved. You have to be metabel. You have to be involved in your child's life, and you have to go ahead and you have to be involved in everything that's happening with your child. But yet, there's a time to be involved. We'll call it like directly involved, and there's a time to be remotely involved, right? Parents who are directly involved in every single thing. I had a mice like this. One of my children had a really difficult friend situation at school. Really difficult, like go wrong. And so my first reaction is, I'm calling this kid's father. They said, no, I'm not. Actually, my wife said, no, you're not, right? And then, right? So it was interesting because as a parent, you see a wrong occurring and you want to step in and you want to help, but then you realize at the end of the day, part of maturation is also allowing your children to deal with their own problems. And that it's not the job of the parent to fix everything. So what an incredible metaphor. Sometimes if you want the esrog to grow, you got to be a little bit hands-off. You have to be a little bit hands-off. If you're always hands-on and everybody has their hands on it, it's just not going to grow. Of course, I want to be careful. The converse is very dangerous as well. In other words, not being involved at all and just taking a laissez-faire approach to raising children and to the chinuch of children and just somehow hoping and wishing that things were going to work out, that's a very bad idea as well. It's this incredible balance between the right level of direct tipul and involvement, but also not too much so that it stunts the growth of the pre. Incredible. So, Rabbi Anai, both say, Esrog, Rosh Hashana Shelo Masai. Listen to this. When is the Rosh Hashana for an Esrog? Now, seemingly we just established that before. Amrle Shvat, right? Specifically to B'Shvat. So Shvat de Chadoshim or Shvat de Tekufa? Which Shvat is it? Is it the Shvat that is calculated according to the months of the moon, what we call Chodesh Shvat? Or is it Shvat of the Tekufa? Now, both say, we're going to get into this sugya in a couple of days from now, but this is as follows. There are technically speaking 2 different ways you could calculate the month of Shvat. There's a calendrical Shvat, which again is established according to the calendar, and then there's seasonal Shvat. Seasonal Shvat, as we'll talk about, is 30 days after the winter solstice. So again, we'll see this a little bit more in depth. So which Shvat is it? To which the Gemara says, Amrlei de Chadoshim. No, Shvat is Shvat. Right? When we speak about, again, Tu B'Shvat being the Rosh Hashana for Esrog and the Ilanos, that is calendrical Shvat. Boy, we need Rav Nachman. Family Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yanai, Haisa Shana Me'uberes Mahu. But it's an interesting question. What about if it's a leap year? Look at Rashi. Haisa Shana Me'uberes Mahu. A Maseh Rosh Hashana Shvat. A Maseh Rosh Hashana Shvat Hasamoch Leteves O Adarishon Sho B'Makom Shvat. Shabbos, here's what's interesting. In a leap year where there's 2 Adars, which is considered to be the Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos? Is it the month we call Shvat, or is it what now in this year is called Adar Aleph? Both say, by the way, halacha l'maisa, it's a leap year, right? It's a leap year this year. Yeah, leap year this year, right? Slach aparas parsha. So both say, so again, you hear the shaila. So now we're going to say Shvat is Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos, and again, specifically for Esrig, which Shvat? Now both say, you'll say to yourself, what's the shaila? What's the shaila? Of course it's Shvat. Both say, what's the shaila? What's the shaila? Remember, both say, when do you have a leap year? When do you have a leap year? Right? Or I should say, conceptually, when is there a leap year? I don't mean now, because now the calendar is a bit more organized. But remember, the concept of a leap year comes when you see that Pesach is going to fall out in the winter and not in the spring. Right? Pesach is Chag HaAviv. That's why, again, that extra leap month is always Adar. Because when we see Pesach is coming, so we'll say, so it's a good kasha. If Shvat is Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos, and the reason it's Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos is because the majority of the rain has already fallen, the sap is surging up inside of the tree. So which month should really be the Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos? If it's calendrical Shvat, it's possible that maybe that's a little bit too early in the winter. So maybe in a leap year, Chodesh Shvat for this purpose is actually Adar Aleph. It's good kasha. To which the Gemara says, Amrlei halach acharov shanim. Now, again, since a leap year is infrequent, we go after the majority of the years, which means that Shvat is Shvat is Shvat. So both say, so in both of these questions, the answer is the same, which is we go after calendrical Shvat. So calendrical Shvat is always going to be the Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos, which makes sense, Rabbi, because if you get into a situation where one year Rosh Hashana Le'ilanos is calendrical Shvat, and then in another year it's solstice Shvat, and then in another year it's actually Adar Aleph, that's a Meiser disaster waiting to happen. Amar Rabba, we'll say, here we go. Great case. Esrog bas shishis shenech. Whoever thought, right, that Meiser could be so exciting? Now, let's say, I think a lot of times, I think in two areas, I think in Tumantara and in Trumas and Meisros, we hear these sugyas and it's like, oh boy, right? We say, no, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's holy, and we're like looking ahead, how many pages is this? Say, but incredible. And isn't it interesting that so much of this really just comes down to remembering a few basic facts? The 1, 2, 4, 5 model, 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 6 model in terms of Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Also understanding, again, our categories. Vegetables are a category. Trees are a category. Grain, grapes, olives, category. Kidneys, category. And now, amazingly enough, Hashaila is, what does Esrog fit into? That's the ongoing Shaila. Fascinating. Amar Rabba, Esrog ba shisha shnechneses l'shvius. If you have an Esrog, a year 6 Esrog, going into the Shemitah year. So we'll say, so we're assuming now what the case over here is as follows. This is an esrog which blossomed in year 6, but is going to be picked in year 7, in Shemitah. So what's the halacha? Petura min ha-meiser. Such an esrog is pater from meiser. Uptura min ha-bir. And it's also pater from beer. Now, I'll say, let's talk a little bit about this because this is important. I realize, I haven't done a shir on Shemitah yet, which is usually I would have done it during Yom Tiv, so we'll have to schedule that also. So we'll say, the Gemara says as follows. So Rabbi says like this: you have a year 6 Esrog going into year 7. If you pick it in year 7, so halacha l'maisa is pater from meiser. So again, presumably it's pater from meiser. Why? Because we're going to go basar chanata. I'm sorry, basar lekita. You'll go after when it's harvested. Anything during Shemitah. But remember again in our 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 6 model. Remember what's not included in that? 7. Why not? There's no Trumas and Meisros in Shemitah, right? Everything is hefker. So if you pick it during the 7 years, pater from Meiser, but also pater from beer. Both say the halacha of beer says as follows, which is during the Shemitah year, everything is hefker. So I could take stuff from the field and I could keep it in my house. But I'm only allowed to store things in my home so long as they are readily available in the field. The moment that a particular type of item is not readily available in the field as hefker, I am not allowed to store it anymore. So the Rabbi therefore says, if an esrog that blossoms in year 6, picked on year 7, is going to be pater from meiser, but also is not subject to the beer requirement. Okay, we'll talk about that inherent contradiction. Similarly, again, if you have a year 7 esrog, which means it blossomed in year 7, but you're picking it in year 8, Petura b'maiser, it's pater from maiser, v'chayeves bebier. But ultimately, again, it will be subject to the laws of beer. Similarly, Abai says, 1 second. Bishlama seifa l'chumra. I understand the seifa, the second case, because you're just being machmir. Essentially, if you have an esrog that blossomed in year 7, you're picking it in year 8. Essentially, what you're doing is l'chumra, you're treating it like Meiser produce, but you're also treating it like year 8 produce. So it's going to be pater for Meiser, but ultimately, again, chayiv in beer. I'm sorry, you're treating it l'chumra like Meiser produce on both ends. So the Gemara says, El Reisha, Petura min abir amai. So we'll say, but here's the problem. The first case doesn't make that much sense, says the Gemara. The first case, remember again, was a year 6 esrog being picked in year 7. So blossoms year 6, you're picking it in year 7. What was the halacha? So the Gemara says it's pater from meiser, but also pater from beer. So the Gemara says, I don't understand that. Petura min abir, why is it pater from beer? Amai, damrin on zil basar chanota. Because assumingly we're saying that halacha l'meiser, the status of the esrog is determined by when? By when it blossoms. If that's the case, and therefore really it's a year 6 esrog. If that's the case, ihachi techayev b'meiser. If it's a year 6 esrog, I will say, then what? If it's a year 6 esrog, therefore it's pater from beer. Therefore, what? This should be chayiv in what? In what? In meiser, because it's a year 6 esrog. Amrlei, this is fascinating. Amrlei, yad hakom mimashmishin ba. Since during year 7 everyone touches the esrog, the at amrit techayev b'meiser. And you're going to say that such an esrog ultimately again should be chayiv in meiser. And I'm both saying, now what does it mean? Take a look at Rashi. Yat hakom mashmish. This Rashi is right across from Tosof's she'ein. Yad hakom mashmishin ba nihidul mechayiv la'avkura delo naga b'shvius miu kol sados upardesos hefker hein b'shvius ve'ein esrog zeh nishmar ba levado. Va'al korcho hakol mishtamshin bo vehefker pater min hamais. So it's very interesting. So what Rabbah is suggesting is as follows. In reality, according to Rabbah, when the esrog blossoms in year number 6, that's really a year 6 esrog, right? So according to Rabbah, we go basar chanata, right? The esrog status is determined by when it blossoms. So if it blossoms in year number 6, even though it's picked during Shemitah year number 7, it's pater from beer, because beer is a din in Shemitah produce. But this is not Shemitah produce, this is year 6 produce. So why isn't it chayiv in meiser? So it's very interesting, because Rabbah says essentially, de facto, it's hefker. Right? Why is it de facto hefker? Because anything that's on the tree during the Shemitah year, what's going to happen to it? What's going to happen to it? Everybody's got their hands on it, right? So even though technically speaking, halachically, it's not hefker because it's year number 6 produce, but practically it's treated like hefker because everyone's touching it. And because everybody's touching it, it doesn't make sense to obligate it in meiser. Quite fascinating. Rav Hamnuna says no. He says, bas shishis shenichneses l'shvius. If you have an esrog that blossomed in year 6, but you're picking it in year 7, liolam shishis. That is year number 6 esrog. And I both say that means that's year number 6 esrog for all purposes. Namely, it's not chayiv in beer, but will be chayiv in what? Meiser. Ubashvius hanichnesas l'shvinis liolam shvius. And a 7th year esrog that blossoms in year 7 and ultimately is picked in year 8 is a Shemitah esrog. So both say, so Rav Hamnuna is much more straightforward. Rav Hamnuna says, we go basar chanata. We go after blossoming. The identity of the esrog is solidified and concretized in the year in which it blossoms, even if it is picked in a 2nd year. So if it blossoms in year 6, picked in year 7, it's year 6 esrog, not chayiv in beer, is chayiv in meiser. Blossoms in year 7, picked in year 8, it's a Shemitah esrog, pater from meiser, and ultimately subject to beer. Meisir Reb Shimon Yehuda, Meisvei, Reb Shimon Yehuda Omer Mishun Rabbi Shimon, esrog bashishis shenichneses l'shvius, petura min ha-meiser, O petura min ha-beer. We learned as follows: that an esrog that's a year 6 esrog, right, blossoms in year 6, picked in year 7, is petura min ha-meiser. Ultimately, again, it's pater from meiser, o petura min ha-beer, and it's pater from beer. So we'll say this is like Rabbah. She'in lecha davar shechayiv b'meiser, ele im kein gadol b'chiyuv v'nilkat b'chiyuv. Very interesting, because Reb Shimon says that halacha l'maisa, the only time something is chayiv in meiser is if it grew in a state of chiyuv and it was harvested in a state of chiyuv, which Rabbi say is something new. Because according to this opinion now, Rabbi say up until now we've been focusing on like an either or, right? Either halacha lamaisa, we go after when something is harvested. I'm sorry, when something blossoms or when something is harvested. What Rabbi Shimon now is introducing us to is that something is only chayiv in meiser if it both grows and is harvested in a state of chiyuv. But if you're missing either one of those things, halacha l'maiser is not chayiv in meiser. Ubas shviyas shenichnesas l'shminis. And if you have a year 7 esrog that ultimately again is harvested in year 8, petura min meiser, petura min abir. Ultimately again it's pater from meiser and it's pater from the din of beer. Why? She'im l'chad davar shechayiv bebeer ele imkin gadol b'shviyas v'nilkat b'shviyas. Unless, of course, it both grows during Shemitah and is harvested Shemitah. So we'll say, this is a new opinion. So we'll say, look now what we have. We now have 3 opinions, right? We have 3 opinions. One opinion says, basar chanata, right? Basar chanata. Now, I just want to point out over here, right? We have 3 opinions. Basar chanata, right? Esrog goes after it blossoms, right? Second opinion, basar lekita. Esrog is determined by when it's harvested. Now, a third opinion, Rabbi Shimon, who says, something is only chayiv in meiser if halacha l'maiser it grows and is harvested at a time where there is a chiyuv. But if it either grows or is harvested, let's say in a Shemitah year, then halacha l'maiser will be pater. So the Gemara says, just by the way, Reisha kasha Rav Hamnuna, Seifa kasha bein l'Rav bein l'Rav Hamnuna. The first case poses a question according to Rav Hamnuna, and the second case is problematic both according to Rabba and Rav Hamnuna. To which the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, Tanoihi. This whole thing is a machlokes tanoim. Whole thing is a machlokes tanoim. Disanya, Rabbi Yosef Avtulmus,Heid Mishum Chamisha Zekenim. Right, Rabbi Yosef Avtulmus testified in the name of 5 elders. And what was the testimony? Esrog, Acher Likitaso Lemaiser. Right, that what? By an Esrog, Rabbi say, its Meiser status is determined when? When it is picked. When it is picked. Everything goes by when it's harvested. But Rabboseinu nimnu b'usha, and the rabbis in Usha, they decided, va'amru, achar likitaso, bein lemaiser, bein l'shviyas. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. So Rabbi Yossi gave testimony in the name of 5 Zekenim, that ultimately, again, estrog status for meiser is determined by when it is harvested. Now, that first opinion doesn't mention anything about Shemitah. Then the Rabbanan came along, the Rabbanan and Usha came along and said, esrog status, both for Meiser and for Shemitah, is determined by when it is harvested. To which the Gemara said, 1 second, Shviyas man de kashmei. Why the Rabbanim and Usha bringing up Shemitah? We're not talking about Shemitah. We're only talking about Meiser. We'll say Amud Beis. Chisrei mechsera v'hachi katoni. In reality, there was a piece that was missing, and here's how you have to do it. We'll say, here we go. We were about to reach the finish line in this. V'hachi katoni. Esrog achar likitaso lemeiser v'achar chanoto l'shviyas. So also listen to this. Rabbi Yossi said the halacha is as follows. An esrog of for meiser purposes, we go basar likitaso. Whenever the esrog is harvested, that will determine the meiser status. Right? Meiser status determined by when it's harvested. But for Shemitah, we go after what? Blossoming. So we'll say a very interesting bifurcation here. Right? So according to Rabbi Yossi, name of the 5 Zekenim, 5 elders, we go for Meiser after Likitaso. For Meiser purposes, esrog is like, essentially what we're saying is like this. For Meiser purposes, esrog is like what? It's like what? Like a vegetable. And for Shemitah purposes, it's like a tree. A tree. So for Meiser purposes, identity, or halacha, right, I'll call it identity, is determined by when you harvest it. And for Shemitah purposes, identity is determined by when it blossoms. But the rabbis in Usha got together and they said no. The Rabbanan in Usha came along and said no. First of all, it's just too confusing. An esrog goes after its harvesting for all purposes. So as I say, halacha l'maisa, an esrog essentially, the Rabbanan Usha are saying an esrog is treated like what? Like a vegetable. Like a vegetable. So rather going back to yesterday's daf, why would an esrog be considered like a vegetable? All right, water. Because remember again, first of all, it's gedelim al kol mayim, right? All types of water, right? And second of all, it continuously and consistently grows like a vegetable. So the Maisa, again, the Rabbanan and Usha said, that halacha l'maisa esrog is treated like a vegetable, both for maisa purposes and for shemitah purposes, and its identity is solidified and concretized when you harvest it. So we're not finished yet. Itmar, Rabbi Yochanan Mishlagish Amri Tarbaihu, esrog bas shishis shenichnas al-shvius. If you have an esrog, a year 6 esrog, that goes into year 7. So I will say, so this case over here is where, again, blossoms in year 6, ultimately harvested in year 7. Li'olam shishis. It is a year 6 esrog. Okay, so we'll say, so once again, we're kind of going back over here. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish saying, basar chanata. No, an esrog is like a tree, and therefore its identity is solidified and concretized by when it blossoms. Ki asa Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan, esrog bash shishis, shenichnas al-shvius. If you have an esrog that blossomed in the 6th year, but was harvested in Shemitah in the 7th year, afilu kizayis v'nasis kikar. Even if in year 6, it was a tiny little, esrogula, right? It was only like a zayis, right? Like the size of an olive. And then Baruch Hashem, it went ahead and it blew up to the size of a loaf of bread. Right? By the Sfardim, you see esrogim like this, right? Right? The big esrogim. Chayavan aleh mishum tevel. Ultimately, again, you're chayav mishum tevel. Now, what does it mean you're chayav mishum tevel? That's just another way of saying what? Basar chanata. You go after blossoming. Go after blossoming. Everything by an esrog is determined blossoming. So we'll say, so I just want to point out, the Gemara is having difficulty kind of settling on a position. Now, what I do want to point out over here is that this last statement of Rabbi Yochanan is talking about Shemitah, right? That halacha l'maisa, an esrog year 6 that goes into year 7, ultimately again will be chai as we go basar chanata, and that it's not Shemitah produce. It's not Shemitah produce; it's year 6 produce, and therefore will be chayav in meiser. Okay, Tan Rabbanon. So let's go back to a little bit. Actually, you know what? Let's pause here for just a moment and let's talk about esrog. Let's do the Rambam on esrog. So we'll say, here we go. So halacha l'maisa. Right? This is the burning question. So what do we do with this? We've got every single opinion under the sun when it comes to esrog. So what is the halacha? So I will say, I want to point out to you something interesting. What should I start with? All right, let's go with the Rambam. There's 2 pieces in the Rambam. There's Rambam and Hilchos Shmita, and there's Rambam and Hilchos Meiser Sheni. Let's go with Rambam, Hilchos Meiser Sheni, Perek Aleph, Halachas Hey through Vav. Listen to this. V'cheina esrog bilvad misha peras ha'ilan harei hu kiyerek v'holchin achar likitaso bein lemeiser bein l'shvius. All right, so the Rambam says straight out, halacha l'maisa, esrog is treated like a vegetable, and therefore halacha l'maisa, both for meiser purposes as well as for shemitah purposes, we go ahead and we go basar likitaso. The identity of the esrog is determined by when it is harvested. And he gives examples of this. The Rabbi say now, yet the Rambam then says something very interesting. So that's the halacha, right? Bottom line, the way the Rambam paskins, esrog is a vegetable. Identity for both meiser as well as for shemitah is determined by when you harvest the esrog. Yet in halacha vav, listen to what the Rambam says. Even though we go ahead and the esrog identity is determined by when you harvest the esrog, bas shishis shenichnasa l'shvius. If you have a year 6 esrog, blossoms in year number 6, harvested in year number 7, afilu haisa kezayis v'nasis b'kikar chayeves b'maisrus. Yet the Rambam says a year 6 esrog that blossoms in year 6, harvested in year number 7, you have to take meiser. You have to take meiser. Which Rabbi tells you what? That the Rambam is going to paskin l'chumra. In other words, in a case, see, we'll treat an esrog ultimately basar l'kita, as long as that doesn't exempt the esrog from meisrus. But halacha l'maisa, we're going basar l'kita is going to create a kula, namely it'll palter you from meiser, that we won't do. So essentially what the Rambam really does is he paskins l'chumra by an esrog. And in fact, in Hilchos Shmita, listen to this, hayerek b'shas l'kita. So Perek Dalet Halacha Yud Beis in Hilchos Shmita. V'esrog afilu haya kapul kodem Rosh Hashana v'nasa b'kikar shvius chayev b'meisus b'shvius. So both sides, this is fascinating. So it's two halachas. Meir adin the Rambam paskins that an esrog goes basar l'kita. Identity of the esrog is solidified and concretized when it is harvested, except we're machmir b'shmita. Machmir b'shmita. What do you mean machmir b'shmita? That if you have a year 6 esrog, it blossomed in year 6. but ultimately, again, you don't harvest it until year 7. In that case, we'll go basar chanata. We'll treat it like a tree to make it chayiv in ma'aser. So we'll say, so essentially, the Rambam paskins l'chumra on an esrog. So l'chumra in that normally will go basar l'kita, we'll treat it like a vegetable, but l'chumra that if it blossoms in year 6 and is harvested in year 7, we'll make it chayiv like a year 6, fruit to make it chayiv in ma'aser. Incredible. We'll say that's the halacha. That's the halacha. Feels like a weight's been lifted off our shoulders, right? We've been walking around. What's the status of an esrog? What's the status? What's going to be? What's going to be? Ein simcha kataras asveikas, right? No greater joy in life than resolution of doubt. The Rambam always comes through. Says the Rambam. Says the Gemara. Sorry. Kiyas Rabin. Nope. Sorry. Tan Rabbanon. Elon shechantu pirosakos. So we'll say, now we're gonna move out a little bit because we've been hyper focused on esrog. Now we're gonna talk generally about trees. So Tan Rabbanon. Elon shechantu pirosav kodem tu b'shvat misasel l'shana she'avra achar tu b'shvat misaser l'shana haba. Could I both say this is kind of like a Talmudic, right, softball, right? This is an easy one. Okay, good. So we'll say, Tu B'Shvat is the new year for trees. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if you have a tree and the fruit matures before Tu B'Shvat, then ultimately again, blossoms before Tu B'Shvat, then it's part of, we'll call it year 1, the previous year. If it blossoms after Tu B'Shvat, it's part of next year's year 2 cohort. Beautiful. Now watch this. So we'll say, so therefore again, you have a brisa that explains anything that matures. We'll call year 1 and year 2. So anything that matures prior, when we say mature, I mean blossoms prior to Tu B'Shvat is tithed, right, according to year 1 status. Anything that blossoms after Tu B'Shvat is tithed according to year 2 status. Fine. Amrem Nechemia, an incredible qualification. Nechemia says, when is that so? Be'ilan sha'ose shtei brechos bashana, with a tree that literally goes ahead and makes 2 brechos. Now, both say, we know the lashon of brechos. Remember from Beah, right? Remember again, brechos literally is a brood. That refers to a dovecote, right? That refers ultimately again to doves that reproduce twice, 2 batches of doves. To which the Gemara says, shtei brechos. The lashon of brechos doesn't apply to trees; it applies to doves. So the Gemara says, brechos ela ema ke'ein shtei brechos. Reb Nechemia said, this is incredible. When do we say that if fruit matures, it blossoms? I don't mean I shouldn't say mature, I say blossoms. Blossoms before Tu B'Shvat is part of year 1. After Tu B'Shvat is part of year 2. Reb Nechemia says that's true with a tree that essentially produces 2 batches over the course of the year. However, aval ilan ha'osa brecha achos. But if you have a tree that only produces 1 batch of fruit in the year, for example, kigon, dekalim, day palms, zaysim, olives, charuvin, caribs, afa pisha chantu perosen kodem tu b'shvat misasrin l'shana haba. In that case, even if the tree blossomed prior to Tu B'Shvat, the fruit is not given year 1 status, but rather it's given post Tu B'Shvat year 2 status. Now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Aval Ilon, Rashi says, Sheperosav niklotin ke'echad basar lekita zinibu. So we'll say, here's what's happening over here. Rabbi Nechemia is saying like this. We have a brisa. The brisa says, if you have a tree, and let's say some of the fruit blossoms before Tu B'Shvat, some of the fruit blossoms after Tu B'Shvat. This fruit that blossomed before Tu B'Shvat are given year 1 status. After Tu B'Shvat, year 2 status. Okay, that's fine. Comes Rabbi Nechemia says, no. When is that true? When the fruit produces when the tree produces multiple batches of fruit. So if you have a tree that produces multiple batches of fruit, like a dovecote that has multiple batches of doves, then Einach Inami, because the fruit is going to be harvested at different times, we go Basar Chanata. So therefore, again, I will say you could literally have a tree that has, again, some fruit that have, we'll call it year 1 status, and some fruit that has year 2 status. However, Rabbi Nechemia says, if the tree only produces 1 batch of fruit, 1 crop a year, so therefore we'll say in that case, now what happens when you produce one? Even when you produce one crop, does everything blossom at the same time? No. In that case where there's only 1 crop, Rabbi Nechemia says it doesn't make sense to say some of the fruit will be year 1, some of the fruit will be year 2. In that case where there's only 1 crop, we go basar lekita. ultimately, again, we will determine the status of the fruit by when it's harvested and not by when it blossoms. So we'll say, fascinating idea. If the tree produces multiple crops, when I say multiple, two, so then you're going to go basar chanata. This meiser status will be determined by when it blossoms. Because since there's two crops, it's obvious that some are going to be year one, some are going to be year two. But if it's only one crop, recognizing that one crop is blossoming at different times, in that case, we won't go basar chanata. Instead, we'll go basar lekita. We will determine the status of the crop by when it's harvested. Incredible. Rabbi Yochanan, nagu am becharuvin k'Rabbi Nechemya. And Rabbi Yochanan says, the people have conducted themselves by carob trees like Rabbi Nechemya. Like Rabbi Nechemya. It's because Rabbi will say, what's the pshat of carob trees? Carob trees apparently only produce one crop of carobs, right? There's one crop per year. They blossom at different times. So in order not to get confused what's what, halacha l'maisa, by the carob tree, we determine the meiser status by when? By when? When it's harvested, when it's picked, like Rabbi Nechemya. So you have Rabbi Yochanan saying that people conduct themselves with a boxer, with a charuf, like Rabbi Nechemya. Eis v'reish lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish lakish has catch Rabbi Yochanan. Benos shuach. Shvius shalahen shnia. Mipnei she'osos l'shanosh shanim. So we'll say, what's benos shuach? Rashi says, these are white figs, right? White figs. So white figs, right? Benos shuach. Shvius shalahen. Listen to this. They are impacted by Shemitah when? Shnia, in their second year. In the second year of the new cycle is actually when their fruit is subject to Shemitah sanctity. Why? Mepnei she'osos l'shalosh shanim. Take a look at Rashi. Shviya shalahem shnia. Shviya shalahem noagetz b'shana shnia shal Shemitah kidmei farish taima. So I will say this, listen to this. White figs, actually the crop in year number 2 of the new cycle. So you have Shemitah, right? You have Shemitah year 7, then you have year 1, year 2. The crops, the figs that come out in year 2 actually have Shemitah sanctity. Why? Rashi says, Mipnei she'osos l'shalosh shanim. Peros hachontim ba b'shviyas ein nigmarin ad shana shnia shal Shemitah. So we'll say, listen to this. Because halacha l'maisa, this is fascinating, the white figs, which blossom during the Shemitah year, are actually not mature enough to eat until when? Until the second year of the new cycle. They take a long time to mature. Right, supposed to see what's happening over here? So remember, Rabbi Yochanan said, people conduct themselves like Rabbi Nechemya when it comes to boxing, when it comes to the charuf, which means that a tree that only produces one crop, we determine its meiser status as of when? When you pick the crop. So Reish Lakish says, really? Let's take a look at white figs. How many crops does the white fig tree produce? 1. Now, interestingly enough, it takes a long time to mature. So it'll blossom in Shemitah, but won't be picked until 2 years later. And yet, what's the halacha? In year 2, when you harvest it, I'll say, what's their status? What's their status? Shemitah, which shows you that when was their identity solidified and concretized? Basar chanata, when it blossomed. That's an example of a tree which only produces one crop, but yet we're determining its status by when it blossomed, not by when it's harvested. That's a contradiction to Rabbi Nechemya. Rabbi Yochanan, you're wrong. You said that people conduct themselves like Rabbi Nechemya with one crop trees. Clearly, that's not the case. Ishtik, Rabbi Yochanan was quiet. He didn't have a response. Amr Rabbi Abba HaKohen, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. Amai ishtik. Why was Rabbi Yochanan silent? Leima lei. Let Rabbi Yochanan say back to Reish Lakish. First of all, Amina lacha anak Rabbi Nechemya va'at amrit li g'Rabbanan. So Rabbi Yochanan could have said, okay, I'm telling you about the sheet of Rabbi Nechemya. You're telling me about the position of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan discuss Rabbi Nechemya. It's okay, this is machlokas. Mishum da Amrlei, because Reish Lakish could have retorted. He could have said, Damrlei shavkis Rabbana va'avdik Rabbi Nechemya. Tell me, Rabbi Yochanan, you're going to set aside the position of the Rabbanan and you're going to go ahead and accept the position of Rabbi Nechemya? That doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, V'lei malei ka'amina lacha nagu vat amrit li isura. So why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan respond? I'm just telling you how people are noheg, and you're telling me that there's an isur? The amarlei, because Reish Lakish could have responded, b'makom isura kinagu shafkinon, because Rabbi Yochanan should have responded, if it's asur, how can you tell me that people are conducting themselves in a certain way? V'lei malei, let Rabbi Yochanan respond, ki amina lacha ana meiser charuvin d'Rabbanan Va'at amrit li shviyas daraisa. Rabbi Yochanan could say, the halacha is the obligation to tithe charuv, bakser, is only dirabanan. So I'm bringing up a case of dirabanan, that people are knowing like Rabbi Chaim dirabanan, and you're bringing up shmita daraisa. Rabbi Abba HaKohen timhani imeshiva reish lakish l'tshuva zu. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Abba HaKohen says, I'm not even sure if Reish Lakish himself ever even asked the question on Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, he's not sure if the Gemara as we have it is even correct. I'm sorry, l'tshuvazu. Im heshiva ha'osva. And if he asked it, did Rabbi Yochanan answer it? Ela ema im kibla Rabbi Yochanan im lo kibla. Rather, Rabbi said the shaila really was Rabbi Yochanan mikabel ultimately the statement of Reish Lakish or not? So therefore, Rabbi say halacha l'maisa. You have this back and forth. Rabbi say, so I will tell you the way that Rambam paskins is in fact like Rabbi Nehemiah. That halacha l'maisa will say we have like this. There is a distinction between a tree which produces 2 crops versus a tree which produces 1 crop. A tree that produces 1 crop, the halacha is we go basar chanata. Everything is determined ultimately again by when blossoming occurs. So if blossoming occurs in year 1, even though it's not harvested until year 2, it is given year 1 status, both for Shemitah as well as for Meiser. But if you have a tree that produces multiple crops, what we call multiple brechos, then Allah Meiser won't go basar chanata. Rather, we will go basar lekita. The identity of the crop will be determined by when it is harvested. I will say this brings the sugya to end. I will say I just want to tell you, tomorrow, ridiculous daf, ridiculous. We're going to get, I will say, into beautiful agadata about Rosh Hashana, beautiful agadata about not just agadata, halacha also, incredible halacha, incredible agadata. It's just an incredible way to start the work. I will say, hopefully, again, if nothing else, I would tell you to make sure, even if you don't remember all the shak levitarya, remember these halachas, because over the last couple of days we learned a lot of really good halacha. Just our 1, 2, 3, our 1, 2, 4, 5, our 3, 6, the different categories. Ultimately, again, of we'll call it when items become subject in Meiser, the machlokes about esrog, the resolution about esrog, and how we treat different types of fruit trees. All right, have a wonderful day, everyone.